A presentation. What's that?
Did you text him?
Text both of them.
No
I
answer.
think we're good.
Not yet.
Do you?
Thank you. So, this is a little awkward. You want me to go ahead and start? Just start.
Jump
We're
in.
gonna start.
Jump in.
Okay. So this year's recommended general fund budget balances at $74,018,262.
We're outta here.
I know, I jumped off sides on the first play. That's
You
a
need the bigger
12.6% increase over the current general fund budget. The budget as presented balances at a property tax rate of 89 cents. This 89-cent rate is 12 cents higher than the current rate of 77 cents. Expenditure increases in the general fund focus on core municipal services and obligations supporting progress primarily, but not exclusively, on the stated goals in the key areas of the Waynesboro High School capital project, employee compensation, and public safety. The stated goals reflect collaborative work done among City Council and staff at 2 budget work sessions. New initiatives include but are not limited to debt service for Waynesboro High School project, high school improvement. Phase 2, a salary scale adjustment for municipal employees. Increased direct financial support for the Waynesboro First Aid Crew. 6 firefighter positions, 2 deputy sheriff positions, 2 positions in the police department, 1 sworn and 1 civilian, and a community vitality fund. In addition to the above initiatives, the budget necessarily includes funds to meet ongoing obligations and commitments initiated in the current budget, which include but are not limited, initiated, yes, in the current year budget, include but are not limited to an increase in support for Waynesboro Public Schools. That's $840,000 as per the funding formula. Employee compensation increases applied in part in fiscal year 25. Positions funded on a partial year basis in 2025. And an increase in Comprehensive Services Act and social services obligations. As requested by City Council, included in this year's budget materials is a multi-year budget that illustrates how support for stated goals that cannot be fully realized this fiscal year might continue in future years. A little bit of context for budget preparation this year. The community obviously is experiencing and continues to experience growth in residential and commercial sectors. This activity is viewed as a favorable economic indicator and will increase economic vitality in the community. Growth also requires elected and administrative officials to assess resources and service levels to ensure that core needs and quality of life preferences can be fulfilled by the municipal organization. Recommendations regarding employee compensation and staffing represent efforts in this budget to fulfill core public safety obligations and service levels. A word or two on the economic and intergovernmental climate. Generally, the local economy is healthy, as evidenced by previously mentioned growth and employment levels. Economists and governmental analysts are also alert to possible refreshed inflationary conditions. Revenue forecasts are positive, but reflect tempered expectations regarding previous rates of growth. Efforts at the federal level to reduce the size, scope, and expense of government pose potential impacts to local government budgets, but at this time lack specificity and certainty in administration of reductions to make it clear or make it difficult to quantify impacts locally and provides insufficient basis for local budget adjustments. Reductions to the Medicaid program hold significant implications for localities. If substantial cuts materialize, they will likely most impact human and social services, mental health services, and education. Staff will continue to monitor the federal activity and adjust as warranted. As you know, this budget is prepared upon the completion of a general reassessment. Overall, values in the community increased by an average of 13.5%. The resulting equalized rate is calculated to be 69 cents. The average single-family residence value is $283,175. The median value among single-family residents is $257,100. I look forward to the continued collaboration with City Council in the coming weeks to confirm the content of the budget or make appropriate changes to meet the council's need and the public's needs and preferences. So that's a very summary level context, but I think it does a good job of sort of highlighting where the focus of this budget lands, at least for the general fund. So Cameron, I think we have a program now to kind of provide a little bit more specificity on different features that I've highlighted here.
Sure. So each year what we try to do is balance back to a base budget. So how much did it cost us to do business during the current fiscal year that we're in, and how much did we estimate? And then what's going up and what's changing. So over the next kind of 2 slides, the change in the budget was a little bit over $8 million. I think it was 8.384 in that range. So I walk through kind of noteworthy expenditure changes and what changed. There's also, I think it's the second or third section in your budget, a summary that's more in-depth than what Mr. Ham just gave. It kind of breaks these out in detail. It details the positions, the additional positions, and we can work through those on the supplemental request and the multi-year budget as well. But I'll hit the high points. Some things to note. I kind of try to pick off things above $200,000-$300,000 to make it so that it'll fit on the sheet. There's a lot of small changes that go either both directions, can go up, can go down. For example, there was additional money in there for Children's Advocacy Center, Valley Community Services Board requests an increase. So those were small dollar increases that aren't on this. So this isn't every single one. But the main budget driver this year is the salary and compensation, with the main piece of that being the salary scale adjustment. At your first retreat, we talked through working through the compensation study a few years back, not getting it fully implemented. And the goal of the compensation study was to get the anchor of the salary scale to a living wage, and then basically every tier below that is 7% down, and every tier is 60% wide. So what this allows you to do, it doesn't get all the way to living wage. It gets to about 87% of the living wage, which then effectively only leaves a few employees below that living wage, and those employees have career paths. They're utility ones, collector ones. They have pretty quick career paths to get above the living wage. So the large piece is the salary scale adjustment. Last year we did a 5% raise, but we didn't do it until middle of the year. It's about $500,000 that was left last year that we needed to pick up this year. We added new positions and freezing of the assistant city manager of public safety. The net on those were $455,000, and we can go through those kind of in detail as we get to the supplemental sheets. Health insurance increase estimate of about $240,000, and that's that the health insurance runs on a calendar year, so some of that's the increase from last year that we didn't have to budget for the full year, and some of that's the projected increase from our consultants from the coming year. And then career development opportunities and stipend opportunities, you'll see a couple items. The career development program has been around for 3 or 4 years now. Public Works, Fire, and Police leverage it the most. And then there's also some stipend opportunities that were requested through the police department for increased stipends for detectives, field training officers, and school resource officers to make them more competitive. So those are the main things that come up to the $4,335,000. Transfer to the bond fund for Waynesboro High School debt service. That's 3 pennies, which came straight off the sheet from the first presentation that we worked through, and actually may have been 4 at that one, but we were trying to get to a $900,000 start for that bond issuance. We think that bond issuance will probably happen if council moves forward with the CIP plan. That bond issuance will probably happen in the spring of the coming year. So you'll have another kind of 2 budget cycles before you have to pay that for that full bond on that. So we have programmed in the multi-year budget increases for that next year and the following as well. The school increase, according to the funding formula, was $840,000. That's 42.5% of discretionary revenue. No changes to how that's calculated. Increase of support for the Waynesboro First Aid Crew of $400,000. as you'll probably recall from Mr. Kreiser's presentation, they undertook a little bit different mode of operation over the past few years. One of the things that we asked them to do as they were transitioning into this, they had a nest egg that we asked them to make sure that they were working down so they weren't sitting on a whole bunch of cash, and we're funding them fully. They've worked through most of that nest egg and now start to need some more support from us. Increase to transfer to the social services, that's your CSA, which is your, and I'm blanking on that.
So that's the Comprehensive Services Act. It's a program that is run in conjunction with schools and focuses primarily on youth and families that are in crisis or tension. A lot of the money is spent serving students who are not able to be successful in traditional classroom, and then providing additional support services for families who are experiencing stress or crisis.
And that's a little bit over, there's two funds in that. It's the CSA and the VPA. 320,000, I believe, was the CSA. The VPA is about 80,000, which is the administrative portion of to actually run and administer the social services.
Correct.
VDOT streets eligible increase, that's offset and by a little bit more by the revenue that comes in from the VDOT, and that's based off the highway tax, or I'm sorry, the gas tax. And then Community Vitality Fund of $300,000. So all of those come up to just short of the budget delta. I think these are a little over $8 million. The budget difference was 8.2 or 8.3. And then noteworthy revenue changes. Big driver is the real estate tax revenue, general reassessment value of $2,750,000, the rate adjustment of $3.6 million, and then new construction of $350,000. Then we also have sales and meals tax. I used the same method that I've used the past couple of years, basically budgeted what we actually received the previous year to pull as much revenue out of that as we could, $565,000. Interest revenue, that's done on a 3-year average, $720,000. I didn't push that anymore this year because there's obviously two things go into that. How much money do you have in the bank? And then what are the interest rates? I have some concern that the interest rates will start to come down some this year. And then we had been going for a while, kind of since COVID, and projects were kind of stacking up on us that we were saving cash for. We're starting to spend those things down pretty quickly. Like, for example, the fire station, the money we got from the federal government for the ARPA funds sat in our bank account for a long time, and we gained interest on that. As we spend that down, that's money we won't get interest off of anymore. So I stuck with the 3-year average there. And I'm sorry, I skipped over the real estate tax revenue. We have the actual assessments from Ms. Homberger to do the estimate on those. Personal property, $140,000. We used last year's assessments because we won't get any new numbers until September of this coming year. And then VDOT urban maintenance funds, that's based on the quarterly amounts received each year for this year, $420,000. And so what I think we'd like to do now is kind of go more into detail about these items, and then also kind of work through the things that we pushed into future years. So, Mr. Hammond, you want to hand out the sheet? So we put it up on the screen so that when we send the we put it up here so that when we send this out, you'll be able to read it when it's in front of you on your computer, but you can't read it here.
When are you going to send this out?
I will send it out as soon as I can after the meeting. I can dump it to PDF and send it out. Okay. I think I printed 7 copies. I think Dot should have an extra. Yeah. Mr.
So again, some of this is duplicative, so we'll try to add value sort of in the presentation and focus on the high points. I'll start with the high school debt payment reserve, and as Cameron pointed out, we're programmed for 3 cents in value on that reserve in this fiscal year. And then you can see the format of the multi-year recommended plan is you see additional increases for that project in 2027 and 2028. Nature's Crossing Technology Center, that is, I highlight that, but it doesn't require any appropriation this year. But I highlight it in order to draw your attention to illustrate the multi-year feature of this document, and you, yep,
No, go ahead, just when you're done with that one.
okay. And we have an additional cent programmed in each of the successive fiscal years 27 and 28.
Just so everyone's aware on that one, the money that we're setting aside for the debt payment on that and that we're using currently to cash flow, that project is still being set aside again this year. Our hope is, I think, Mr. Hitchin at EDA is going to try to apply for some more grants. So our hope is that he will be successful in that, and we won't need those last two, and maybe even be to the point where he's successful enough that we don't need all of the debt payments set aside that we already have, and we could slide some of that to the high school. So I was not as aggressive on the NCTC debt, just because it's kind of on the same track as the high school, as the high school project too. Not planning on borrowing for that until probably the spring of this coming year, and it'll reflect that in your CIP plan. You'll see a go bond income to cover that cost, and so you won't have a full payment actually due on that until 2027. So you've got some time to wrap up saving and get that debt payment wrapped up while you pay interest only on that debt for a year and a half.
Speaking of hope and expectation, it is expected that as we improve compensation levels for municipal employees, vacancy rates and resulting vacancy savings will reduce year over year. And so Cameron wants to draw our attention to the need to start funding CIP with operating cash. And we had hoped to perhaps include an investment of that nature in this budget, but we weren't able to realize that. In fact, currently, we don't have that programmed until fiscal 28. The next item, again, I just want to perhaps illustrate the way this document functions, is a position request in the Commissioner of Revenue's office. It is not recommended that for this budget, nor have we identified a succeeding year in which to program it. So the value of that position is listed in the unplanned column. The next item of significance is WAFAC support, or Waynesboro First Aid Crew support. I think Cameron covered that. I would note that we feel like that the $400,000 increase probably isn't sufficient. And the need for these funds, as a reminder, is the difference between the operating expense for the first aid crew and what the crew is able to recover, and their ability to bill, revenue recovery, and then also the current level of government support for the agency. Working down a little bit to the 9 additional firefighters. That's, I would observe. So 9 was requested in this budget. I think we recommend 6 positions. And then you can see in fiscal 27 and 28, additional investments to work toward the chief's stated goal in terms of that manpower and staffing.
Can I grab that one for just
Sure.
a second too? So on the 6 firefighters for this year, we recommended 3 be funded on the first of the year and 3 be funded in January to make sure that Andrew had time to staff up for those. So the second number that you see in next year is the second half of the 3 that are funded in January, and then I believe the next 3 are in the 2028 column.
Then the next item is that I would draw your attention to is the salary scale replotting and adjustment. And that's simply the implementation of the salary study or compensation study that was completed pre-COVID. And Cameron talked a little bit about the plan that we have for that. Again, noting that our effort, or the recommended effort this year, does not achieve our full goal, and that there are investments noted in fiscal 27 and 28. If it's helpful, just to pause for a second and talk about the salary or the compensation plan, and I think over the course of our work in this budget, we'll ask the council to consider a compensation philosophy. But the purpose of the study is twofold, and that's to study the content of individual positions in our organization, and then study the market compensation for those. And that's to establish a system that affords equity in both job internal equity, the relationship of positions to each other within the organization, acknowledging job content, requisite qualification, work conditions, and hazard. And then also the external market equity. So what are other organizations of similar size and nature paying for individuals that occupy those positions? And you achieve, on the one hand, internal equity, that's relationship among positions within the organization, and then external equity, the relationship of how we pay to our competitors. I would like to note, again, given the size of the investment, that the goal and the plan for the study is to achieve a level of 50% of market. And that simply means that of the organizations that furnished information in our study, we would attempt to have be at the 50 percentile, meaning 50% of the organizations pay less than we do, and 50% pay more. And that's simply to illustrate that it's a reasonable goal and a reasonable ask given sort of our position in the valley and the nature of our market. A companion goal to the study itself is to tie the city's pay system to a market indicator that would help preserve and ensure connection to the economy. The living wage is the selected indicator. I think Cameron talked a little bit about that. And so just to reiterate, that's the living wage for a single individual. It's not based on a family with 2 children or 3 children, it's just the single worker. And again, the overall plan for implementation is 3 years with a 50% investment, achieving 80% of the stated goal for this budget. I think that, again, we're trying to work into graduated levels of specificity. If there are topics within the general presentation or this review that you want to understand in greater detail, I think we can certainly work to do that. We would schedule that information sharing or discussion for a future budget work session.
And I think similar to the CIP plan last year, kind of what we talked through with that, as we adopted it, the only thing that we can do this year is legally appropriate funds for this year. So similar to the CIP, as you work through the budget process, we may want to spend some time in making sure that everything that's here and out is where council wants it to be and agrees on. Obviously, everything that you want in the budget is in, or anything that you don't want in gets moved out. But understanding that as we work through adoption, it will somewhat be an endorsement of the second half, or not the second half, but the next kind of 3 or 4 years. As we work through. So again, not legally obligating, not legally binding, but just being mindful that this will end up as a document of record at some point in the budget document itself.
Can you point to the one column I did not talk about in my remarks is the fund balance column. And that simply is the model that we've used in previous years where we pull out from budget requests items that we think are appropriate to fund with fund balance. And these are what we would refer to as small capital investments, oftentimes replacement vehicles, replacement equipment, smaller investments in city facilities. And so, again, this year we would recommend that in order to achieve those items that we would appropriate fund balance as a companion to the budget process.
To piggyback on Mr. Ham's point, we are still leaning pretty significantly on the fund balance for our vehicles and things like that. One of the things that we've done in previous years that I've not done yet would be we worked through, we didn't use the IT reserve to offset costs of peripherals. That's in your budget. We didn't use the money in VDOT street maintenance covers the equipment needs in that fund. So we did do some things, small things towards the less than kind of $300,000 things towards getting off some of the fund balance, but we certainly didn't get off all of it for some things that are generally recurring. Most of the times we're buying some police vehicles, we're buying a sheriff's vehicle, a maintenance vehicle about every year.
Okay.
Oh man, that did not show up.
So we also provide some information regarding the general reassessment. I'm going to talk while you work, or maybe I won't.
That's fine.
We've selected 3 price points to illustrate what the impact, first of the general reassessment or the change in property value is, and then, as a companion to that, what the impact of several tax rate points are. We picked a $125,000 property, a $250,000 property, and a $500,000 property. And in terms of the value of, how close are you getting, Keenan? Because I'm
30 seconds.
Running out of material and you're distracting.
Yeah.
Don't distract me while I eat jelly beans.
How's that?
That looks great. So you can see on the far left, a home value of $125,000, 3 price points that we put there. The first column represents the 2024, the current year's tax assessment. The third column, 2025, represents what that property would pay just based on the increases in value. And then the next 2 columns illustrate what the property would pay at an 89-cent tax rate and an 88-cent tax rate, with yearly changes in monthly changes, the impacts of that. And you can see that the yearly change for that $125,000 home at 89 cents is they would pay an additional $300 in real property taxes, which is the equivalent of $25 a month. And then you don't need me to kind of explain the rest of the chart. It's intended just to show, again, how the value of the reassessment impacts homeowners, and then the impacts of the different tax rates as well.
The only thing I might point out is that's the generalized reassessment number. Folks will experience difference amount in their reassessment. I think we put that qualification on the reassessments a number of times, and maybe even in the lower tax rate ad. But always like to say it is the best we can do is just kind of a general across the board. This is what we saw for everything from vacant land to commercial property to residential development.
Okay. Some context and comparator rates. I realized that the recommendation of 89 cents is a substantial one, and will represent a significant, or at least appreciable, additional tax burden for families in our community. But I felt like it would be helpful to add some context to what an 89-cent tax rate would mean relative to other municipalities in the Commonwealth. Again, our current rate is 77, the equalized rate is 69. The average rate among Virginia cities, for those cities with populations smaller than ours here in Waynesboro, about 22,000, the average rate is $1 per 100. Similar, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Those are cities with populations similar to ours, and I think I ran that at about either 18 or 20,000 up to about 32,000. Smaller populations, those with 18,000 or less, are at 99 cents per 100. And cities with larger populations are at $1.11. It's interestingly enough, among all Virginia cities, the average rate is $1.04. And so the only point being is to provide a context on which you could plot 89 cents and get a sense of relative expense, at least on that one price point.
So I'm going to hop back a slide. Most of the presentation is focused on the enterprise fund rates. Probably most of this, or it's focused on the general fund rates. Probably most of the discussion will be focused on the general fund items, but did want to provide a quick update on the enterprise funds. So no increases in any of the funds except for the stormwater utility fee of 5%. That's to cover some general inflation, and that fund couldn't quite afford the compensation study within that fund without an increase. As we worked through these, we're still seeing positive net position and good growth in the water, sewer, and refuse funds. These funds are, though, starting to come up. This one with some red top zone, Shenandoah Village Drive changes. This one with, or upgrades would be a better way to put that. This one with I-9. Todd, remind me, what's the other item in the sewer that's coming up fast? And now it's the one that we did, the digester, the plant upgrades, and then some I&I work that needs to be done as well. And then this fund is starting to be pretty heavily impacted by our fees at the landfill. So our recommendation is going to be, let's hold tight on these. The funds look good, the net position looks good. We're starting to get good action plans back for those funds, so it's probably time to go ahead and do a rate study in all of those funds to just kind of see where we are. And our plan would be probably to bring an ordinance for that. If we can get what I would call actionable procurement in the next couple of weeks, probably go ahead and bring a recommendation out of the net position for those funds to go ahead and start rate studies, so that way they can kind of inform your budget next year. I don't think we have quite enough clarity, and undertaking 4 rate studies at once is a big lift. And I don't think we have quite enough clarity on what the next level of our permit is going to be in the stormwater. So our recommendation would be hold 1 more year on doing a rate study in the stormwater while we get some clarity on what's going to count for MS4, what's not going to count, and what projects we're going to need to do. And let's focus on kind of these 3 to make sure that those funds stay healthy and in good shape.
Has the county or Stanton done any rate studies on the refuge collection pertaining to the landfill rate increases?
Not that I know of. I think the county pays the landfill out of their general fund because they use Augusta Disposal. And then Stanton, I'm not aware of anything they've done on
Yeah, there are
their
3
refuse
pretty distinct approaches to solid waste management. Stanton, for example, requires their residents to take service from the city. And so that's kind of a feature that is, I think, beneficial in this environment. To my knowledge, I don't think that the county organizes or provides collection services. That's
My understanding is they just subsidize the tipping fees for
Correct.
Augusta Disposal out of the general fund. So they don't charge Augusta Disposal or any commercial hauler in the county as much as just a regular, if you're just going to drop construction waste, but then they pay for whatever the delta is that they need to pay out of their general fund, I believe.
The state has changed, made some modifications to their service program, so that might have been born out of either a service study or a rate study. I'm happy to inquire and see if they did a rate study.
I think I'd be curious.
Yep.
So, then the last thing that we had, our kind of next steps. Monday, we had kind of planned on working through the CIP. I think it's slotted as a separate work session, but we can probably work through that on your regular business agenda. If you remember in November timeframe, we appropriated a good chunk of the funds for the 2026 CIP anyway as we work through the high school project, and I think a couple of tax software for the commissioner and treasurer, and I feel like there was one more large thing in there that's escaping me now. So a lot of the 2026 work has already been done. So that one's going to be pretty light. It's a heavy lift, but the new material will be low, and then we'll start to work through the next couple of years of the CIP, which again will be heavily impacted by the Waynesboro High School project. Plan is right now, I think what we had worked through and what we felt like the direction we were given was we wanted to see the borrowing on the high school in the next fiscal year. So I had planned on go ahead and showing the revenue from those GO bonds in the next year's budget. And my guess is NCTC, I need to touch base with Greg and make sure he's still on track to borrow, but my guess is NCTC will show GO bond revenue as well. You're going in the right direction on the debt reserves for those, as long as we kind of stay the course on the plan to fund those. The last kind of housekeeping item at this point on that will be an actual vote on whether, and I don't know whether we'll do VRA and get into the state pool, or whether we had some pretty good success a few years back going out and getting our own financing, and it may just depend on how creative we need to be with the financing. The VRA and the VPSA, the Virginia Resource Authority and the Virginia Public Schools Authority, that do borrowings for those 2 projects, are pretty stringent on how they do their borrowing setup. If we were to go out and do our own, it would be a little bit, more flexible on how we wanted to negotiate that deal, if you will, for how long we wanted to do interest and things like that. The other thing it provides is a lot more flexibility on when you want to borrow, and when our consultants ran, Davenport, our financial advisors, ran the numbers. The last time we felt like we could get just as good a rates doing it ourselves for that refinance. So we'll get with them as soon as this budget is done and audit season starts to pick up. We'll get with them immediately and start to give them some direction on which way we think we're going to go. Probably wouldn't be in the general fund CIP, but a couple of projects in the water or sewer fund might require go ahead and borrowing this year, just to see how quickly we get through, depending on how quickly those projects stack up. There is, and we'll go over this on one of the future work sessions a little bit more in depth. We were able to add a little bit more funds to the water reserve for the Shenandoah Village Drive pump station, and we were able to start a reserve for the projects in the sewer fund. So we think we can kind of meet those obligations as they come. So CIP presentation on the 14th, as well as the lower tax rate public hearing. That ad has been placed, so it should be legally good to go. April 23rd, budget work session and alignment for current year. We'll probably add some enterprise fund to that, work to that as well. April 28th, that's an actual regular city council meeting. Budget rate and fee public hearing, potential ordinance introduction. May 7th, budget work session. That may be when we want to spend some time, make sure that we're in alignment based on any feedback we got from the public hearing, make sure we're in final alignment for the final adoption of the ordinance, and then also may want to spend some time on those future year columns and make sure that we're in alignment on what goes in the final budget document. That's one of those ones that if we don't get through it completely, we can always wrap that up at another work session. That document just needs to be printed and out before June 30th. May 12th, 2025, adopt all necessary ordinances. May 28th, if all goes well with the CIP and council is in agreement and feels like we're going in the right direction, we should be able to introduce at that meeting and then adopt at the following. So those funds will be appropriated and out of your general fund into your CIP fund, so they don't clutter your general fund for the audit. Before the end of the year, we can make that transfer. And then July 2025, fund balance appropriation for non-CIP. Those would be those items, if you're picturing that supplemental chart, kind of in that second column, those items that we were talking about. I think it was some police cars, some park maintenance, and some sheriff's vehicles.
So that's the formal schedule for next steps. I think at this point, we invite questions, or also invite feedback or reaction to, if you have advice for us about topics or areas that you feel like you'll want additional analysis or additional presentation, additional Q&A. I guess what general feedback is, if you can furnish it. Alternatively, if this meets your expectation and preference, you can let us know that as well.
I'm gonna meet with Cameron this week, and we're gonna talk about some questions I need some clarity on. It's not ready to be proposed now, but I'll look at the mayor. Is now a good time to talk about maybe some of those guardrails we've talked about on how we share revenue with the school boards?
What are you doing?
I'm flipping back to the, to call out the,
Is it, Kim? Good
I
time as any? Okay.
believe so, yeah, absolutely.
so just starting from a base on that, naturally based on kind of history and precedent, if you will, this would be automatically excluded from the funding formula going forward.
So my thought on that, and this is part of the guardrail thing, so the 900,000 is excluded from the funding formula, right?
Yes, sir.
But at the same note, to get that same 900,000, right, if it wasn't excluded, you're looking at 8 cents to get that 3
A
cents.
little bit less than double.
Yeah, so about 8 cents to get the 3 cents to the schools. That would be 5 cents that would go to other necessities, while the school would still get the 900,000, instead of just saying they don't get 1.4 cents of the 900,000. Right, that's when you're excluding the 900,000, you're really only excluding an additional 1.4 from the schools, since we're pulling that from the main tax revenue.
So the way that I would look at it, assuming that you're gonna use real estate or general fund revenues, and assuming you're gonna use real estate because it's easiest to express in a penny, in order to raise $900,000 for that, or the additional 900,000, I think it would be a little over 6 cents that you'd have to actually raise, and then you would give 42.5% of that to the schools, and you would have the rest of that pie to pay the debt payment.
Yeah,
If it weren't excluded, the plan would be we cut it basically off of the bottom of the revenue, so it's never even, it's expressed so that way the schools can go through our act for entitled, here's what your real estate tax revenue was, here's what your personal property revenue was, and then they can go to the bottom and see, okay, now $900,000 of that is being backed off before we apply the 42.5% to
yeah,
that number.
so it would just prevent them from getting an additional,
Yes, sir.
1.4 cents of the 900,000.
Yes.
But if we said that, well, we're gonna hold our 42%, we're raising our revenue, and then we just say that, any revenue above equalization, 8 cents of that, 5 cents is gonna go towards what we want, and 3 cents is gonna go towards the debt payment. Instead of just guarding the 3 cents, you actually, specify that, you're above equalization, we're gonna have 8 cents. 3 cents is gonna go to debt payment, 5 cents is gonna go to other stuff, you know what I mean? And that would still equate in the formula, and then you'd actually be getting, right?
Keeping in mind that wouldn't affect the transfer this year, because that number's done
Yeah.
looking back, or in retrospect.
Yeah.
But yes, that's correct. If that's something that council wanted to do, if you said everything above the kind of natural growth of the reassessment, we wanted to hold harmless. I think that's where we start to get into maybe working with legal, rewriting, getting the formula down as it sits, and then actually getting a pretty specific method on how you want funds to be withheld from that. Because again, right now it's kind of all based on precedent and notes and budget documents that, yes, that's what council requested. Yes, that's in the summary sheet. That's what council requested. It was specifically for a project, where you could make that extremely specific, that once the budget's adopted, right after that's done, you adopt a resolution, some sort, to say, hey, these funds are to be withheld at this amount. And then the other clarifying point on that, do you want it withheld on the nominal value, whatever that is, or do you want it withheld on the value of a penny that increases every other year? So there's some nuance to that discussion that you can fall into if you don't kind of walk it beginning to end.
Yeah, that's a conversation we, maybe maybe a meeting with some of us and some of the school boards should have too, just to best other things above board, and they know where we're at, so they don't read about it in the paper or get blindsided. Because we're not trying to take anything away from the school board, but we're trying to maximize the effectiveness of each penny for the taxpayer.
I think that would be a good idea to get together on a
However you
or at
wanna
least
do it.
with the leadership and staff and
Mhm.
communicate to them.
However you want to do it. I'm pretty flexible on that. Just want to be transparent.
Yeah, I would just offer, I think I said it last time, maybe just be more blunt. I think it's completely inappropriate to have the conversation until we have 2x2 conversations with the school board, because we are talking about cutting school funding pursuant to the current formula. That is what we're talking about. So let's call it what it is. So.
No, I disagree with that.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about cutting, I'm talking about balancing it in a way that it's not taking, and it's not subtracting a dollar away.
I follow the
Yeah,
math, but balancing means is we're creating more equity on the city side of the penny versus the school side. And I'm just saying that we would do ourselves a tremendous service to have that conversation with our colleagues on the school board first, instead of doing it in a public meeting. Because one, their budgets are already set for the year, so one, we wouldn't even be, I theoretically, I don't think that the body would be interested in doing anything about it this year because their budget is fixed. They certainly are experiencing continued stresses at the federal and state funding levels. And if it's what we want to do, which is something that I have advocated for, Mike, I think since I walked into Chambers, like the funding the formulas never made sense to me. I mean, the reason why we don't hold it to a fixed per pupil cost, and with a sliding scale based off of whatever we need to do for additional compensation, base it off of enrollment. I mean, there are other state and federal funds are tied to ADM, and yet we don't. Right? They could have a decrease of 150 students, and we give them more money. It doesn't happen at the federal and state level. We give them more money. So the formula doesn't make any sense to me, but again, I think just for the spirit of what that means, because they're dealing with the whole universe of tens of millions of dollars of a budget too. I think it would only be fair, and I'm not interested in to be blunt, I'm not interested in having, if everybody else wants to, I'll go along, I'll show up, right? But to having 10 folks in a room to talk about it, that's completely unproductive, because everybody they clinch up and nobody says anything in these meetings. So the 2x2s are the most effective. When Bruce and I would go out there and meet with them when we did the first phases of the high school, that was, we rolled through it. It was what had been languished for years, we reconciled in months. So
Yeah, I'm not opposed. The total enrollment is not a bad idea either. It's just, we just need to be, we need to look at it deeper, and because,
100%.
yeah, I'm open to that. I have no problem discussing it further and discussing with them further. So, but this is definitely a discussion we have to have.
Understood.
Because I would also just, in out of fairness, just because, I'm sure like we all do, got a lot of friends that have the biggest hearts I know that work for the school system. The composition of students is changing in a way that the services, I couldn't have ever imagined a school teacher, an administrator having to deal with when we were in school. I wouldn't have ever imagined it. And the trauma that these kids are experiencing and the resources that have to go to support them so they can be successful is just wow. So I think that's the context of what we don't know, instead of just talking math and what we cut or what we balance or equalize, is it doesn't, as a community, it'd be better suited to have a conversation.
We need to look at some data too on it, if that's handy, or that where to get your hands on it at, like the price per student in other areas our size of what they spend. That would help give us better information on it.
Any in mind? Because
Just ones that are comparable, school systems that's comparable to us.
stand
Outside of Nova.
I thought we,
Yeah.
I thought we did that. Did we not do that at one point?
I know the
There's
school
I
board did at
understand.
one point.
I
I
was
don't
gonna
know
say,
if we
school
did.
board would be able to pull that up.
What I have noticed, and love me some Dr. Castle, but what I noticed is I think after my first or second year, everybody stopped talking about per pupil expenditures. I don't even know if it's in, I haven't looked at this, to be fair, I haven't looked at this year's presentation, but for years, it just poof, went away. No more talk about per pupil
I
expenditures.
think we're somewhere between 12 and 13,000.
Yeah, I think it's like 15.
It's closer to 15.
Nah,
15,
that's all
16.
Either 2 or 3 years ago, I was at the school board and it was 14.8 and change.
Yeah, and again, it has to increase because, we have a revolving door in the school system. So,
Mhm.
they have the same stresses and compensation. They have arguably more competition, right? Because the pool draws to much more diverse areas. So, yeah, that's all I would share. I agree, it's worthwhile conversation. Amen, hallelujah.
Where's the Tylenol?
Okay,
Yes, sir.
all right, we'll look for some feedback on, like the structure. We'll distribute agendas for upcoming, work sessions, and then in the meantime, if you can share where you would like us to focus that would be helpful.
Well, I'll just, to throw a wrench in the works and just kind of say it out loud, is that, my own personal opinion, and I may just be on an island here, is that I think there's value in everyone coming and sharing feedback with you. But we all took an hour out of our time this evening. Like, we gotta have another meeting to talk about it with all of us. That's cool, but, I hate surprises, and I don't wanna walk into a room personally and hear, well, we went in another direction because Mike got some secret intel from somebody who had a very strong opinion. Not interested in it. It's the public process, and let's all talk about it publicly. So respecting that there's gonna be questions and some additional research and data that could be shared, but let's do this in the light of day.
I hope that's been your experience, working with me through
I
the
think
years.
this has been a great, this budget season has been a great experience thus far.
All right.
So the way forward is that we're going to set up some two by twos and have that discussion. It's not going to affect this budget, as I
So-
understand it.
Are you talking about the school thing or
Right.
the general discussion of the budget? That's correct.
Okay.
Well, that's my understanding.
Okay.
I mean, they're already shopping contracts
Yeah.
for new
Yeah.
teachers at this point, based off of the
And
anticipation of the
that's
revenue.
fine, but
Yeah.
my whole approach was going forward. I
Yeah.
think we all agree going forward. that
On the
there needs to be
anticipation, but
some
on the
adjustments.
anticipation, what did they balance their budget on?
Anticipating the
Whatever's
revenue.
The number
'Cause they're
that's
not
in
getting
that
this,
budget.
this is cash, it's 2-year-old cash.
Mhm.
So for 2 years, they've been waiting for this cash to arrive, so they're balancing their budget off of what they had been committed to for the agreement 2 years ago. So that's how they're going out and shopping
Which was
contracts.
what?
$840,000 of new revenue.
With me.
Anyway, so, again, just to be clear, we will receive and meet with members, to clarify information. Anything that, if you trust your city manager, anything that would represent a change in the change of actually, what you have is a recommended city manager's budget based on the work sessions that we did together. Any changes at this point have to originate from the council. So if you came in, we'll explain how we compose the budget, the data behind the budget. And then, but if you said, hey, I'd like to see something at 88, then those ideas ought to be vetted, not just with the manager, but with your colleagues. And if, I will vet them with the mayor to make sure that there remains integrity. So,
That's great.
So how do you foresee that transpiring? How do you, if my colleagues have a specific rate that I want to see at X rate, is
So-
that something that we're going to have discussions in the work sessions? Or is that something that they would come to the city manager and say, hey?
no, I think, and I would note that has been our history and practice, this meeting's recorded and broadcasted. So those changes need to occur in public. So, and the manager's preference is that rather than tell the staff how to get there, tell us what you want. Let's say that your goal, a member's goal is I want to see a budget that comes in at 88 cents. Then your staff, and I would vet that among the members. And if everybody says, yeah, that seems like a good idea, we should see that, then your staff would develop a budget that says, okay, if you want to balance at 88, here's how we would get there and preserve, to the best of our ability and judgment, progress towards the stated goals. On the other hand, you might say, I'm not so much worried about the rate, but I feel like that the investment in staff is too heavy. Show me something with less staff. or, you know, a lot of times we would just say, what is your stated goal? Or, and let us tell you what that would be. But again, I certainly would appreciate it if you have ideas that change the recommendation, that you've voiced those ideas here.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And what I was getting at
Let's not beat around the bush.
was the projected growth of 840,000 is 3 cents that we would reach with the 77, keeping it at 77 cents, being 8 cents above equalization, would be the projected growth. So they're not projecting on 89 cents. They projected at 77.
Right.
So that's what I was kind of hinting
so-
at. What
But we could
we
do
didn't,
the,
we
could
just
do
came
the,
up with 89
we could,
cents.
correct me if I'm wrong, we can do the 840,000 dollars at the current rate, right? So you take the equalized rate of 69 and you hold it 77. There's enough cash
Yeah.
to do $840,000. But then what we do is we've just wasted a lot of time talking to our police chief, our fire chief, our sheriff's office, our emergency directors, our first aid crew. I mean, we just wasted a lot of people's time, and we wanted to go there. We could have started there from the beginning.
But that wasn't what I was getting at. What I was getting at is that we didn't project 89 cents until the last budget
That's
session when we projected it. So I was getting at what did they balance their budget on?
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
Okay, and
It's 2
that's
years
where it
ago.
was 2 years. Well, 2 years ago, 89 cents wasn't on the radar. So what did they
It was
balance?
77 cents.
Yeah. So that's where I was
Yeah,
I
at.
got
Now,
you. Yeah, sorry.
okay, so that makes sense now. Thank you.
So I would just throw in an alternative idea, rather than a rate, is to do this is what I would ask of anybody who came to a podium. Not that, you know, we're going to
Sure.
stand up at a podium, but don't, I mean, and I've literally, up here, I've begged people, please don't come up and tell me what the rate is that you want. Tell me what you don't want.
Right?
Tell me how many sheriff's office, we go, you've been cool since 1976, just keep rolling with it. We don't need any more police officers. Fire department's is doing fine. Tell me what you don't want out of the budget and let us respond that way. Because the rate is just, it's an illusion. If it's not tangibly connected to an actual thing that we've been talking about for 6 to 8 months.
Sure, I appreciate the difference. I mean, right, my advice was perhaps tailored to the 5 elected officials, but you're right that the feedback that I think would be most helpful to you is like a service level comment or, a preference of what's in the budget that you don't like. And then this group translates that into guidance for the manager.
Yeah, I love the forecast year out thing, the looking out in ahead, and even though we didn't hit it this year, how might we, off the known needs today, how might you achieve that in the future? I think this has been a really great exercise and appreciate all the hard work.
Go back to our first retreat. I think Terry was the one who brought it up. And, you know, that 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is a good idea, and that 5-year plan will help in years to come, the discussions we're having now, projecting out for years to come. So that's definitely also something else we need to start thinking about. I mean, you know, it's too late for this budget cycle, but after this budget cycle's over, we really need to look at that and make it better make it easier on you guys, as well as this or whatever council sets in those seats, you know, 4 years from now, 5 years.
Do it like the rate study, you know, I mean,
Mhm.
you'd say this is what the level of service needs to be, this is the equipment, this is depreciation, here's the forecast, yeah, so. I think this is a great start. I think the other thing too is just, not to be Debbie or naysayer, is that, to contradict maybe what I said at the beginning, is you also recognizing that this stuff is gonna happen every single year, just something's gonna happen. Something's gonna break that you're like, oh my God, it costs how much? And it throws everything, and it's just like our household budgets, right? Like, I can't believe this is happening. But, you know, we can either plan for it, or we can react to it. So, then that's also a choice. Right? So,
Nobody was expecting tariffs 2 years ago.
Side note, what I was, that's all my, to finalize the point I was trying to get across with them having normalized their, or having done their budget at the 77 cents, then we're projecting an additional 12 cents on top of that. 5 cents of that automatically goes to school board based on formula. Well, if 3 cents of that went to the debt payment, you're gaining 10 cents, you know, instead of 7 to paying down what we want.
I got you, and I
That's
I
where,
totally
that
agree.
was the whole point of me.
I got you. I think
Yeah.
and I think that the sooner, if we haven't settled in on what the new approach is gonna be, if there's a new approach, if there's not a new approach and it's not settled in by, say, July, August, forget about it for another year. But time is of the essence, right? If you're gonna do this rate increase, there's an opportunity to reset the conversation about expectations, because otherwise they're gonna be building that into their budget.
Yeah.
We run those calcs just for council's reference and send them to the school board. Middle November 15th to December 15th, depending on how the audit goes. We wait for the audit to finalize, actually have the ACFA run through, and then we put the spreadsheet together and send it over to Ms. Hutchinson and
So
Dr.
then,
Castle.
really, reality, we
So-
should have a consensus by September then.
Yes, if you'd like a change to that, that would be nice before we send them the Hagers, which are getting
Yeah,
next
well,
year.
because you can't, again, we don't wanna cut the budget, we don't wanna take
We don't
away
take anything away.
anything, so you also don't wanna overshoot.
Yeah.
It's my goal, it's a big chunk at one time, like, for
Yes.
looking at trying to do
Yeah,
a
you're
whole lot at
absolutely
once instead of staggering it.
You're absolutely right.
Any other comments?
Anybody look directly at me?
Cause you,
Huh?
Thank you.
I've been
We're
working-
good.
if you need these back, correct?
Please, I was, one of the sheets printed incorrectly, so I'm gonna fix it in the morning and we'll put them back in your box before noon tomorrow. So,
But you
my
mean one that says Cameron McCormick, 120% raise? Is
That
what it was?
Wait, you got that one? I thought
That
I thought